I think one of the coolest experiences I've ever had in my life was getting to explore places where no human has ever walked.
Wow.
Like that is such an unreal experience. I can't
That is
describe
really
to you.
awesome.
Coming to you straight from Fremont, California, this is the Fremont Podcast, dedicated to telling the stories of the past and present of the people and places of the city of Fremont, one conversation at a time.
Hello, Fremont. This is Carol. We are on Main Street in Niles. You're listening to episode 60 of the Fremont Podcast.
Now, here's your host, Ricky B.
All right. Well, I am honored to have Mary Beth Wilhelm with me. Is it Dr.?
Yeah, it's
Mary
doctor.
Beth? Okay.
Yeah, my PhD is in planetary science.
Well, so I just kind of want to jump into what you do. You work at NASA in Mountain View, and what is it that you do at NASA?
Yes. Okay. So I wear a couple different hats. I'm mainly a research scientist.
Okay.
And I have a job that I call it not a real job because it's kind of like the job that everybody dreams about having when they're 10.
Okay.
And I just never gave up that dream.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah. I'm excited to hear this.
Yeah. So I study my job is to study basic things about Earth and the planets. And I'm also building instruments eventually to go explore other planets.
Okay.
So that's kind of like the highest level view of what I do. To get a little bit more into the weeds, I study sort of at the junction between biology and geology, which is a really fun sort of like, it's like forensics, but on, organisms that have been dead for about 1 billion years.
Wow. Wow.
And then thinking about how do you apply that knowledge to looking for life on other planets.
Okay.
So you would call me an astrobiologist, but it's a really big word and a kind of brand new scientific field that hasn't been around for more than like 50 or 60 years. Wow. That combines a lot of other types of physical sciences into one thing to try to answer this question of, are we alone in the universe?
Okay. Wow. That's a lot right there. And this is something that you enjoy, something that you have done since you were, or that you've been interested in since you were younger?
Yeah. I mean, my first grade science fair project was about like the rocks and minerals on the moon and Mars. So like, I don't know. It's just like one of those things. My mom said when I was little that I only wanted to read nonfiction, and she thought that was really weird.
That's awesome. Very cool. So you found an important chemical signature in the data coming from the Mars rover. Is that right?
So yeah, I've worked on a lot of cool projects in the past. When we're studying Mars, what that means is that we're approaching it from a couple different angles, right? Like sometimes we study places on Earth that are like Mars. Okay. And so a lot of my research has been down in some of the driest or coldest and driest places on Earth. And I can tell you some horror stories of camping in those places.
Well, I love camping. And
I love camping too. I'm a professional camper. And then also, we send robots to other planets to go and make those measurements for us. Okay. And so some of the data comes from satellites that orbit Mars, and some of that data comes from rovers or landers that are physically on the surface. Okay. So one of the I've worked on a couple of papers that was looking at some of the chemical signatures of the rocks on Mars and trying to understand what that means. And in, when was that? 2015, I had this paper that went viral, which was a totally weird, crazy experience where we found potentially signals of what's called like hydration of minerals. So like basically rocks that got wet. Okay. Wow. Which is cool because Mars is a huge desert.
Right. So, so would you say you actually found water then, or just rocks?
That's like how that's kind of how it got out into the world. Okay. But I don't know. I mean, it was a controversial paper. I mean, I don't know. Like scientists argue about the craziest stuff. I don't even know where to begin with that one.
That's funny. Yeah. Have you? So you mentioned you travel to some places on Earth that kind of would mimic or be similar to what you might find on Mars. So what are some of the places you've been? Okay. I want to hear camping stories.
Okay, yeah. So let's see. The coolest place, literally coldest place I've ever been was this location in Antarctica. So I got to go down in sort of an unusual way. I actually went down with a Russian team.
Wow, that's cool. Wow. When was this?
This was in 2016.
Okay.
So I got on this airplane. We flew out of Cape Town, South Africa. And there were 150 Russian men and me.
Wow.
And then my team, which was an international team made up of Argentinians and Americans and, people from all over, going down to study this really unusual lake system that's completely cut off from the environment. And within that lake, we were looking at these organisms that are similar to the ones that resemble the very first evidence we have of life on Earth.
Okay.
So we were trying to look at, like, when you don't have animals and bugs and fish and mammals, like what happens to those organisms in those environments? Like, what does it look like? So, Antarctica is such a inhospitable place to, pretty much all life, including us. Yeah. It's the only continent in the entire world where there's never been any indigenous humans. So that's kind of crazy.
That is crazy. Yeah.
So
in that regard, it seems that it would be untouched in some ways. So.
And the places we were studying, like, I think one of the coolest experiences I've ever had in my life was getting to explore places where no human has ever walked.
Wow.
Like, that is such an unreal experience. I can't
that
describe
is really
to you.
Awesome.
And then, so we take samples and measurements, come back here, I bring those samples into my laboratory, and then we study them.
What kind of samples are we talking? You're talking about stones, rock?
Yeah, like rock and like the microbes, they live in these mats.
Okay.
And so we take the like microbe mats, and they're like really stinky and fun colors, crack those jars open in my lab. And so what we're looking for is, it's kind of funny if you think about it, like, so on Earth, when organisms die in like the ocean or whatever, they get buried.
Okay.
And then they go through a bunch of like chemical changes, and they can get fossilized, but sometimes they don't. But they're like the molecules that made them up sometimes make their way into what we call the rock record.
Okay.
So there's actually like a way of going back in time and looking at those rocks, like extracting out those molecules and being like, oh, this organism ate that. It's crazy.
Wow.
So it's like kind of like forensics, but on a really long time scale.
That's
so
crazy.
That's what we were kind of doing in part down there, trying to understand like the past environment.
So then what you would do with whatever you find there, you would be looking for similar formations or similar structure or similar whatever on Mars.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's the other hat that I wear at NASA is I get to pretend to be an engineer.
Okay.
And I work with a small team of engineers to develop instrumentation that like replicates the human, what the human scientists would do,
okay,
but robotically. And like we're making right now the next generation of instruments to go explore Mars.
Wow.
So maybe in 20 years from now, we can come back and talk about what we found.
That would be awesome.
But yeah, it's like it's a crazy job also in the sense that you make plans over these huge decadal timescales.
Yeah.
And it takes these huge teams of people with so many different skill sets, scientists, engineers, finance people who do, just dealing with like generally bringing in money and spending money. I don't know. It's hard to describe like how many humans touch the things that I work on.
Wow. Do you want to go to Mars?
I don't know. Like, okay, like other sort of.
Because I think there's some sort of a plan or at least talk of going and
like humans will go. I think I want to send the robots first.
Okay.
Like if it was up to me, like if I was queen for a day, because I think that we want to go and explore the environment. Like you have to remember, the human is like we're extremely dirty.
Yeah. Right.
Like I don't know if you know this, but we will slough off about 1 million particles per hour. And that's like a clean human who's like showered and wearing clothes. So you can imagine that if we're going to a place where life is barely surviving, because Mars is a very challenging place to be alive, even worse than Antarctica. When humans go and explore it, we're gonna have to be very like thoughtful about how to make sure we don't, if we are looking for life there, like that we don't detect ourselves.
Yeah. Wow. So you went to Antarctica and you had to sleep in freezing conditions. I mean, did they have housing there, or was it tents?
No,
or what was
camped.
it? Okay.
It's like camping in your freezer for 2 months. I didn't shower.
Oh my goodness.
For 2 months. And the other crazy thing too is that because there's a commitment to stewardship in that location, you have to pack in and out all of your waste. Wow. So that includes everything that comes out of your body.
Yep.
And like water is very heavy. So that's why it's like you don't want to bring that back out.
Wow.
So so we flew into this Russian base. We were the first people to see the crew at the Russian base after 2 months, 3 months. They like after their
They'd
whole
been
winter.
They've been staying there for.
They call it like winter over.
Wow.
So we break that, and then we stayed there for like a day or two, and then we took these sleds out to the site, and they dropped us off, and that was it. Like it was me and 11 other dudes for 2 months in the middle of Antarctica, and so. It was really cold.
What was one of the most challenging or like crazy things you experienced while you were camping out there?
I think, it's just like very challenging on the body, and I physically had to train very hard for it. Like you prepare to do the science, you prepare all of your gear, but like the first week you're just kind of cold all the time, and then your metabolism kind of kicks on, and it's okay. Like you learn how to use the gear, because not only are you trying to exist there, you're trying to do work and at a high level and use your brain. So it's like you have to go very slow and be very thoughtful and you eat about 5,000 calories a day just to break even.
Wow.
And even that, I still lost about 10 pounds.
Yeah, I was going to ask if your body changed at all. You're
just hungry all the time.
Wow.
And then, the other thing I learned too is like you turn your body into a machine. You eat the same thing at the same time every day, same amount. So your body gets like very used to that rhythm. But yeah, no fresh fruit or vegetables.
Did you see any other like wildlife or anything like that while you were there?
We saw birds come in and out. There were these birds that lived near our campsite that would come in, lay their eggs, feed their young, go back out to the ocean. But there's no plants. Like, the craziest thing to me was when we were flying back from, it was called Novolazarevskaya Station, back to Cape Town. The first time you smell the ocean, it's like so fragrant. You're like, oh my God, chlorophyll. Like, and then getting to Cape Town and like walking in the streets and smelling food, because it's like living in like sensory deficit a little bit.
That's crazy.
So it was kind of cool.
What kind of food were you eating that whole time?
Just freeze dried stuff.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Rehydratable astronaut ice cream, actually. Turns out very delicious.
Okay. Yeah. We'll be right back. You can hear the rest of this conversation in just a moment. Dale Hardware is now ready to open their own pet center. Now you can get all of your pet supplies. You can get everything you need for your furry friends right at Dale Hardware. On top of that, Dale Hardware is the only hardware store in the country that has a destination center for Milwaukee tools. There are more Milwaukee tools under that roof than any other retail establishment in the country. Even with these big changes, the heart of Dale Hardware has not changed. So come on down to Dale Hardware and let a specialist help you find exactly what you're looking for with the type of care and attention that hasn't changed for over 65 years. Buying a home is a big decision. When I'm trying to make a big decision in my life, I turn to family. Family generally has my well-being in mind. They want the best for me. Whenever I visit Jennifer at Petrocelli Homes in Niles, she treats me like family. If you're in the process of buying or selling a home, turn to family. Turn to Petrocelli Homes. And now, back to our conversation. So you said it was 2016 you went down?
Yeah, so that was 2016. That was like towards the tail end of my PhD.
Okay. So I'm just curious if you have made any kind of discoveries or anything that from that trip that has benefited your research.
Yeah, we're still working on the samples now. COVID turned out to be really a hard situation. Like we were in the middle of doing the analyses and extractions of these really precious samples, and then our lab shut down. But the coolest thing that we learned so far is that the organisms that are in the lake, like when they like basically this lake level sort of dropping, and those organisms that are sort of making like eking out a living at the bottom of this lake, when they die and get freeze dried after like the lake level drops, they do like leave behind signals, like chemical signals of their existence.
Wow.
So it is helping us sort of build up this framework for what we want to look for on Mars.
So you went to Antarctica, and then you've also been to, you said, one of the most dry or desolate places.
The driest place in the world is actually in northern Chile.
Okay.
Which is cool. So I've been there like 4 or 5 times.
Okay.
And yeah, you can count the number of plants you see. It's pretty crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
What would be the difference between what you might be looking for in like a frozen climate versus like a dry climate? Yeah,
they're pretty similar. It's like why, like the question you have to ask is like, why is something dry? In the Atacama, it's because it doesn't rain. In this place in the Antarctic, it also has to do with like snowfall, but also because the water is never really warm enough to be liquid.
Okay.
So there's not a lot of time that an organism can be exposed to like a liquid environment. So yeah, you see a lot of similarities in the geology too. Like these are places, there are very few places in the world you can see what's called a ventifact, which is a type of rock that gets carved by the wind.
Okay.
And there's not many places. You see them on Mars everywhere, but there's only a couple places on Earth that you see them. And like, they have that in common.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Wow. So I'd imagine, I mean, you were in Antarctica, where you said you were one of the first humans, or the first human to like go in certain parts of Antarctica, or that part of the planet, which is amazing. I imagine there's probably very few people who have traveled to that part of Chile as well.
It's actually not that far from the coast.
Okay.
And it has a really interesting history in the sense that it has been mined for a lot of natural resources like nitrates before the Germans figured out how to make that in I think the like mid 1900s. So there's a lot of like natural resources there, and has been actively mined for like probably over 100 years for sure. Wow. And is actually now where a lot of the lithium mines are that are making batteries that are going into Tesla cars. So like kind of crazy.
That is crazy. Wow. I know that the rover recently landed on Mars, right? Or has there been like research? Were you involved in any of the research that's been done through...
I'm not on the current rover team, but I like all of my friends are.
Okay.
So I get to hear a lot about it, but their goals are a little bit different. They're collecting samples and putting them in these tubes that are going to be eventually returned to Earth to study in Earth labs.
Okay.
So that's something like, NASA will be working on for the next probably like 15, 20 years.
Okay.
I mean, longer too. You bring back these samples. We're still studying samples that came back on Apollo.
Wow.
And actually one of my friends, Alex, he got to crack open one of the pristine Apollo samples like last year. So as the technology improves on Earth, NASA's really good about curating and saving and thinking about the future, because our technology continues to improve here. Wow.
So it's, you're doing a lot of research and study on basically what life is, or the nature of life and all of that. And I think your primary focus is to help you understand more of how to discover life on other planets. Has any of the research that you've done helped or aided just understanding life, better on Earth?
Yeah. I think that's like a cool thing about studying life at the extreme, is that because the climate is changing so rapidly, a lot of the sites that I've been at are experiencing conditions that we don't see evidence for on the rock record for like hundreds of thousands of years. So we have this like moment in time where we're seeing everything change very rapidly, and due to climate change, a lot more of Earth's land is becoming a desert. And so I think we're understanding how deserts work and why they work is going to be really important to kind of making plans for the future. So I think that's the cool thing about science. Like you go down these rabbit holes where you're like, okay, I'm the only person in the world who cares about this thing. You spend years killing yourself trying to get this crazy information out of this thing that's like millions of years old. And then you publish a paper and you're like, no one's ever going to read this. And then, I still get these like notifications that pop up on my Gmail, like bing, like someone cited your paper. And I'm like, no way. It's like been 5 years since I published this one paper about the Atacama Desert, and like people in all sort of soil science fields from all over the world are like reading that result and putting it into their papers. And like, it's cool to be part of this global network of like people who think, see the world from that vantage point, and like we all try to use each other's data. I don't know. It's kind of cool.
That's awesome. No, that is awesome.
Being a scientist is really weird.
That is awesome. So like, I mean, is this what you imagined doing when you first like started down this path? Like what I mean, you said you made a thing like of the planets when you were like 10 or 11 years old, and you've just kind of like pursued that dream. Like, what are some of the things that have helped you? What are some of the turning points or some of the significant milestones in your life that have kind of brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I mean, I don't know if I like really had a clear picture when I was a kid of what I wanted. I just knew what I really liked, and like just had a strong drive to learn and a curiosity about the natural world. So I loved to read, and I loved to go hiking, and I liked school, and I don't know, I was like such a nerd, such a Hermione Granger.
That's awesome. My 10-year-old just he's been reading all the Harry Potter books, and he just plowed through them this year. So he just finished the last one, and he's like he has his own wand at home, and he's all
like
that stuff. So yeah, that's awesome.
The millennial culture.
Is this this might be a weird question, and maybe it's just not even a great question, but is it easy to do what you do? In other words, does it come easy for you?
Oh my gosh, no.
Okay, so you've had to work really hard for this.
I think that like this is like the fiction that I have been told I've told myself at every stage of my life, that if I just get to the next level, it'll be easier, and it has got so much harder.
Wow.
At every turn. And like even now. It's like now I'm thinking about what I want to do in the next 10 or 20 years and starting to plant those seeds. But like, wow, the game is so much harder. Wow. Like, I don't know. But I don't think you can think about it like that.
Yeah.
But I tell all my students, like, I don't know, just to try to like stay in their lane and stay focused on what they're working on, but also not to go to grad school.
Well, why? Why not?
Oh, just because it's so hard.
Oh, it's so hard. Yeah.
It's hard.
So,
but it's interesting why it's hard. I think the why it's hard changes at each stage. And like, where I was as an undergraduate was like, okay, like, you're trying to compete against all these other students. Like we were always graded on the bell curve. So you're just trying to stay afloat, and you say yes to every opportunity, and you're so overwhelmed all the time. And like looking back at like when I was an undergraduate, I wish I had spent more time really just sitting with the material and learning it. Like there was no time to just like be. And then graduate school is hard is because you're sort of beholden to one human, your advisor, and studying this like one thing that no one cares about in the world except you and your advisor. And you're only making like, pennies and working 80-hour weeks. Wow. Right. And then, now it's difficult because like you're trying to basically like not only play a game, but the game board's changing all the time. So like we work in this ecosystem that is tied to, bureaucracy and politics. As a research scientist, we have to write grants and get them funded for everything we want to do. So no one's telling me like, hey, you should be doing this. Like I basically write a proposal to NASA, even though I work for NASA. It's really a funny system.
Yeah.
And I say like, this is the important things we should be doing. So you have to convince them it's valuable. And then you have to beat out all of your other colleagues to do it.
Wow.
So you're like working with everybody, but against everybody at the same time. And like,
that's fascinating.
I have to be a good writer, a good communicator. I have to manage my budgets. I have to manage my team. It's like, no, if someone had told me that I had to do all that stuff when I was like studying science, I'd be like, wow, this isn't science at all.
Right. Wow.
But the people who are successful at being scientists are not only good at the technical stuff. You have to be kind of a little bit good at everything, which is like why it's so hard.
You said that you had students. Do you teach then as well? Or?
I don't teach, but like I have students that come work in my lab.
Okay. And
like I'll be on their committees or like, we'll host them. So like it's sort of the opposite of schools where it's like the summers are a really busy time. Like, so I work at NASA Ames, which is just about, 20 minutes down the road.
Yeah.
And we get like 3,000 summer students each year, and they all come in from all over the world and work on projects with us, and then they go back to their schools and keep doing their thing.
Wow.
So yeah, it's kind of cool. It's like cool. I get to do all the academic stuff without teaching.
What is an average day for you look like? Is there an average day? No.
Actually, my mentor told me last week, he's like, you need to learn how to begin and end each day with a clean plate. Or and like what he meant was just sort of like mentally, like not try to carry things over because you're going to have fires that come up every day. My job looks different every day. It's kind of cool in the sense that I get to do a lot of like hands-on work in the lab. Sometimes I'm analyzing data. Sometimes I'm like looking through our budgets or writing proposals, writing papers about our results, presenting those results to colleagues. So it's like, I love the variety of it.
Wow. That's
which is
awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
But my favorite part of my job is probably the creative part. Like, I think it's weird to me that scientists get grouped in with engineers because like we could not be more different than them. Like I would say that scientists are like more similar to artists than they are engineers sometimes.
Interesting.
So it's like you have to have this mastery of the technical stuff, and I'm not trying to undermine that because that is like really a cool and difficult part of the job. But like the creative process, it's like you get like writer's block sometimes, or like sometimes you have to just like put a lot of information into your head and like rearrange it and see what comes out, and then you have to come up with the experiment and design it and then like test it. So I don't know. I think that's kind of cool.
That is cool. So I think Elon Musk has a Tesla auto plant here in Fremont, and it sounds like he's really wants to go to Mars himself. I think you've said Mars is not a trivial thing. Mars is really hard. And since you work for NASA, do you think it's something that that he would be able to do, or that somebody would be able to do within the next 6 years?
I mean, I don't know how to like really fully assess his plans. I think that what I know for sure is that's a really expensive problem. And I think if we know anything and have learned anything about NASA's success in the past, if you throw enough money at a problem, you can solve it.
Yeah.
But like if you look at like what it took to get us to the moon in the 60s,
right.
We were spending a few percent of the GDP on that one activity. So it's like it's an enormous effort, and you have to like build a lot of momentum all in the same direction.
Yeah.
And Mars is a different animal too, because it's so far away. It's 100 million miles, right? Like it's incomprehensible.
Unbelievable. That's crazy.
But the human body itself, wasn't designed for the space environment. So I think there are a lot of challenges. And like I have colleagues at Johnson Space Center in Houston that focus more on those kind of things. Like how do we prepare and like protect and like enable a human to go to Mars? So I don't think it's impossible, but it is really hard.
How long would it take to get to Mars?
I think like 6 months minimum.
Wow.
Because you have to wait for the orbits to line up.
That's a lot of astronaut ice cream.
But you know what's cool? I don't know. Okay, so you want to hear something crazy?
Yeah.
Like one of my friends is an astronaut now.
Okay.
Like we came up together. Like I'm like the slouch of our friend group. But like I know people who are like exceptional humans that like these are the people that are going to be able to do that sort of thing.
Wow, that's awesome. That is really cool. So you were from Chicago originally, right? And then when did you come to Fremont?
So I moved out here with my family when I was like 8 or 9 years old during the .com boom.
Okay.
Yeah, my dad worked for 3Com.
Oh.
Remember the Palm Pilot?
Yeah.
Which was cool. And I think I was like I think it was the only person in my family who wanted to move, but I think it just, I don't know, the idea of coming to California seemed really attractive.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. I just had a good feeling about it, which I don't know why I did when I was 8, but I did.
Where did you go to school here?
I went to Glenmore Elementary.
Okay.
And then I went to Centerville Junior High.
Okay.
That's which was really fun. And like, I look back on my childhood and my experiences here like very fondly.
That's awesome. Well, yeah. What do you love about Fremont? Like, what is it?
Everything.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I remember when I first asked you to come on the podcast, I think your response immediate was like, I love Fremont. So I love that. I love that you enjoy Fremont. So yeah, what are some of the things you enjoy?
I think that is just like kind of an underrated place. Like I'm living on the peninsula now, like really close to NASA. But I don't think that we in Fremont have that same sort of like ego about where we're at. And then I also just love that everyone is from somewhere else, and that like people seem to like come up with a really happy way to live here with each other. And like when I was growing up here, like, it was just kind of cool to like be around people that were from everywhere. Yeah. It's just like such an interesting way to like see the world.
That's awesome. What are some of the places that you enjoyed hanging out at, or what did you do when you were?
Yeah. I mean, so, okay. Like spent a significant amount of time. We used to have a Barnes & Noble and a Borders here.
Wow.
So my parents would just drop us off. I grew up before phones. So we would just, they would like come pick us up at a set time. And like, I think, would read a lot.
That's cool.
He's a really cool kid. But yeah, I mean, my parents were really active members in the community, and we were involved with everything. I did soccer and dance and basketball and just absolutely every activity. I have two little sisters that were, also running around doing crazy things.
Are they NASA scientists as well?
No, they're my middle sister is in like recruiting, and then my baby sister is she just finished her master's in athletic training.
Okay.
So she's the prodigy of the family. She's good at school and sports.
That's awesome. That's great.
But yeah, and like, Glenmore was a really good place to go to school. I had like the most amazing 4th grade teacher. Her name was Mrs. Laird. She actually like passed away in the middle of COVID, which was super sad. And she was a writer for the Tri-City Voice.
Okay.
But she just like lit a fire under me.
That's awesome.
And she would always give me these like special extra assignments. She was the first person who encouraged me to go look at the stars, and like gave me a little like an extra credit homework assignment to go and like, like map out a constellation. And she would just be leaving me books all the time. And she always believed in me and like supported my dreams.
That's cool.
And it's kind of cool. Like what's the craziest thing, and the thing that she geeked out the most about in my career, is I actually got to help in the creation of the stories that went into an American Girl doll. And for her, that was like the pinnacle. It was
oh my goodness, that's
it was
awesome.
Such a cool experience. So there in 2018, there's an American Girl doll who like went to Chile to go study the life there, and she drives a Jeep like me. And
no way.
So it's kind of cool that, and I got to like help edit the book.
That is awesome.
So yeah,
wow.
so they're like, there's elements of my story and her story, and Mrs. Laird just like totally loved that.
That's cool.
So yeah, so that was cool. And then when I went to Centerville, I had this amazing science teacher, and he was a total astronomy geek, and he like gave me textbooks. Wow. Like an 11-year-old. And he would sit with me and he would show me the equations and stuff, and he was trying to explain these complicated things to me. But he just really challenged me. Yeah. You know?
Yeah.
And I think my science teachers were always really kind to me at Glenmore. My science teacher, her name was Miss Goodfellow, and I don't know if she's still teaching at Mattis, but she was like a big influence as well. And she was always, I remember she like fiercely protected me because I was such a nerd, and like, I don't know, like she just like I remember her like defending me to like against the popular kids ones. And like I never forgot that, you know? So it's like, cool. I think it's important to have those teachers who challenge you, who like bring you a sense of community, who like, you know, it's like the social stuff and the science stuff together, like that helped kind of shaped my like early life here.
That's great. Yeah. Do you what else do you enjoy outside of like science? Like what other things do you do?
I love painting.
Okay.
I'm really into art. I don't know. I loved music. I was in band since I was little. Yeah. So I don't know. I haven't found anything I don't like yet.
That's awesome. So if you had I know that you said that you're kind of have the dream job. What is your dream now? Like what is it that you want to do? Like if you look at your life, you know, the next 10, 20, 30 years, like what do you want to do?
I want to find life on Mars.
There you go.
Yeah. So it's really cool right now. Part of my job is to like make these instruments that are going to be the next tools we use to explore Mars.
And when you say instruments, you said that earlier, but I'm just curious, like what are we talking about? Instruments?
So what we're building is this instrument that takes dirt, extracts out all of the organics, which could contain molecules that resemble those that are made by life, and then hands them off to an instrument that does like the analysis. And what we're trying to do is like come up with the way, like basically what I do in the lab when I bring a sample back from Antarctica is what I want this robot to do.
Okay.
Do the same kind of process.
That's awesome. That's very cool.
So what's cool is like, so we're actually not only making the instrument, we're putting together the whole concept.
Wow.
And like this is something that's probably going to take me, I don't know, at least 5 or 10 years to have the first shot at it.
Wow.
Like basically after you build everything, then you have to write yet another proposal to NASA and say like, hey, NASA, like this is what we want to do next. And then compete with everybody else who wants to go to Venus and Enceladus and Jupiter and like all these other crazy places and say like, nope, this is the most important thing. And then they decide whether to fund you or not. And then if you get funded, then you spend another 10 years building it.
Wow.
So that's crazy. It's cool. It's really cool. Like, but just thinking about like, how do we actually make that first detection or first indication that there's life somewhere outside of Earth?
How many people do you have on a team when you're working on these?
My current one, I probably have like 50 people.
Wow.
On my like engineering team, I have about like 5 or 6 that I work with regularly.
Okay.
But but colleagues all over, which is
That's
cool.
incredible. Wow. Well, I'm excited because when one day you discover life on Mars or whatever the next great paper thing you do, I'd love to be able to see that and and be able to say, I had her on the podcast, the Fremont podcast.
Well, I really think it's great what you're doing. And like, I think one of the most important things about Fremont is this sense of community we have and like support for each other and like just building that up. Cause I think that's the most important thing is just like helping everyone realize their passions.
That's cool. Well, thank you for that. And I hope that through the podcast, we can introduce more people to people like you and others and inspire, more people in our community to do amazing things.
Yeah. So, I'm hoping I'll get a couple emails from potential summer interns.
That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. Very cool. Well, Mary Beth, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah.
It's been good to have you. And maybe one day we'll have you back on here again.
All right. Sounds good.
This episode was hosted and produced by Ricky B. I'm Gary Williams. Andrew Cavett is the editor. Music is provided through soundstripe.com. You can find links to our social media and other content at thefremontpodcast.com. Be sure to subscribe wherever it is that you listen so you don't miss an episode. And if you're so inclined, leave a kind review so that others can find the podcast. Join us next week on the Fremont Podcast.
was the only one on my team that liked it. And one of the people we went with, the guy Dale Anderson, who organized the whole trip, he's over at the SETI Institute. He has been going down and studying this place for like over 15 years, and he had like this stash of like 10-year-old astronaut ice cream, and I ate the whole thing.
Wow!
Like found the canister.
This is a Muggins Media podcast.